In this video, we are going to continue work on styling our sidebar. So in the previous video, we did a basic layout of the admin page where we split it into two parts, the sidebar to the left and the page content to the right. And we did that using our CSS, as you can see in the CSS file here. So in this video, we are focusing on further styling the sidebar. Now let us take a look at the HTML that represents this sidebar. So basically, the sidebar has one unordered list with a class of list menu, and this unordered list has a bunch of list items that represent the menu items on the sidebar. So what I want us to do is to select the list menu itself. It is inside the sidebar, so I'm going to first select the copy the selector for the sidebar and then specify the list menu. Now the list menu is an unordered list, so it's going to have some default margin and padding. So let us remove those by setting them to 0, that is margin 0, padding 0, and we'll set overflow to hidden. Now I want to have a bit of, let me first of all refresh. Now I want to have a bit of space between the top of the sidebar and the very first menu item. Like what we have here, there's a bit of space here. So I'm just going to add a padding at the top of 2 rem. And that is that for the list menu. Let us proceed to the next item. Now what I want us to do next is to change the color of these links and the icons. Okay, so this is that padding. I want us to change the color of these links and the icons. So the next thing we're going to style is the links. And these links are found inside list elements in the list menu. And so the first thing we'll do is we'll do text decoration none to remove the underline effect. We give a color of this color I prepared in the background. We'll give it a display of block so that it occupies so that each of the link items occupies the entire width of the sidebar. And then we give a padding at the top and bottom of 15 pixels and then left and right of 30 pixels. So let us refresh, and it is beginning to look good. So what we want to do is move these pointed icons to the right like we see here. So we are going to use relative positioning, relative and absolute positioning to do this. So those icons are part of the link, or rather they are found inside the link item. So we can give the link item a position of relative and the icon itself a position of absolute, and then we use the right property to position it at the right. So we'll do position relative to the parent, which is the link. And then for the chevron forward, remember we gave the icon a class of chevron forward. Let us confirm that again. Yeah, this is it, chevron forward. So we are going to give the child, as usual, we'll give the child element a position of absolute, and then we'll give it a right of 20 pixels, and this will push it to the right. We refresh, and it looks good. The next thing I want us to style is to provide some space between the main icons and the nav items themselves. So let us select that. If you take a look at the HTML, we did give a class of menu icon. We did give a class of menu icon on each of the main icons. So let us select that. I'm just going to copy this and duplicate it, and then we modify it to select the menu icon. And we'll give each of them a margin at the right of, let's say, 12 pixels. And we can change the font size of this icon. For example, here it looks smaller than on the finished project. But I kind of think that this is a bit too big. But depending on your choice, if you want it to be small, you can leave it like this. Or if you want it to be a little bit bigger, you can give it a font size of, let's say, 20 pixels. And then you refresh and it will grow bigger, but I prefer the smaller one, so I'm just going to leave the the default font size. Now when you hover on these elements, nothing is happening. On the finished project, it is supposed to highlight all the items in that list item to have a white color. So let us select the link itself and paste it here, and then we'll add the hover selector on it and give it a color of white. Go back and refresh, and it is working. Alright, so this looks good. Now we can proceed to make this sidebar mobile responsive. So let us inspect elements. And in the previous section, when we were working on the responsiveness of the navigation bar, we were using a width of 756 pixels as the media query for the mobile. So I will just copy that media query in our CSS and then scroll down and pass below the admin layout area, and I will paste this media query. Then I will copy all the styles in our admin layouts and I will paste it inside the media query, and then we can start modifying them one after the other as usual. So for the page wrapper itself, we gave it a display of flex because we wanted to split the page in two and display the two elements across from one another, like horizontally, with the sidebar to the left and the page content to the right. But on mobile, we are going to detach this sidebar and hide it, so we will only have the page content. So in this case, we are going to change from display flex to display block. And that's all the changes we'll make on the page wrapper. As for the sidebar, we are going to change almost all the styles because we are going to hide it somewhere here and then make it slide in when we click on the menu icon. So for now, normally because we copied this navigation bar from the previous section, the existing navigation behavior is still there. But we don't need to use this navigation bar on mobile because it basically doesn't have anything. What we need on mobile is the menu or the sidebar to show up when we click on the menu icon. So we are going to disable this very soon and replace it with the sidebar. Okay, so the next thing we are styling is the sidebar. Now we are basically going to do a similar thing to what we did when we were making the navigation bar responsive. Now we are going to position it as fixed, and this will detach it from the normal flow and position it relative to the entire page. So we can now say top 0, left 0 to place it top left of the page, or to make it start displaying from the top left corner of the page. We can now give it a height of 100% and a width of this time on mobile, let us make it to 240 pixels. We'll give it a really high Z index so that it appears above all elements on the page, and we'll give it overflow of hidden. So we are going to leave it at that. For the rest of the elements, we are not going to have any changes on the list menu, so I'm going to remove that. The links themselves, no changes. In fact, all these other elements are not going to have any changes. Alright, so this is what we have now. Let us go back to the browser and refresh, and it looks good. Now obviously we are going to add the user's logged in info like we have here, but that is coming later on. Let us just focus on animating it so that it can slide in and out like this. So in order to do that, we are going to need an overlay. We are not going to reuse the same overlay as we did in the navigation bar. So let's go to the dashboard HTML And in the page wrapper, we are just going to add a div element with a class of sidebar overlay. And then we make sure that this sidebar overlay is not displaying initially. So we step out of the media query, and in the default styles for the sidebar, or rather the page wrapper, we are going to select the sidebar overlay and give it a display of none. Okay, so now we are going to do something that's very similar to what we did in the responsiveness of the navbar. We are going to use an open class. So whenever we want to open the sidebar, we are going to add an open class to the sidebar. And each time the sidebar is open, we have to make sure that the overlay is also open so that the user can click on it and then close that sidebar. Okay. Now for opening and closing the sidebar, it's very simple. Now let us look at the page. This is the final state of the sidebar in the animation process. So after you have clicked, this is how the sidebar should look like. Now let us move it to the initial state and then animate it from there to this state. Now the initial state is when the sidebar is away and out of the screen to the left. So what we will do is we are going to use the transform property and translate in the X direction, and it should go out of the screen by a distance of its width. So the entire width of the sidebar should be out of the screen to the left, so no part of it is going to be showing. Okay, so if we refresh this, it will disappear to the left of the screen. Now if you want it to open, we are simply going to bring it back to position 0, which is where it was before we moved it away. So when we apply the open class, our sidebar is going to open as it was before. We also want this to happen over a certain period of time, basically to have a little transition effect. So we'll add a transition property, and we are going to be animating the transform property over a period of 0.25 seconds, and the timing function is simply going to be ease in out. We are going to apply this same timing function to the normal state of the sidebar itself, so that when it is sliding back out of the screen, it should also do so with a bit of an animation effect. Okay. We can't test now because we haven't yet written the logic to be adding the open class to the sidebar. We are going to do that very soon using JavaScript. So as for the sidebar overlay, we are also going to display it using the fixed property. And before that, let's be sure to do display block, because initially we were displaying it, we were setting display to none. So when we are at this media query, we should make sure that it is showing, but the position should be fixed, and then we should set the top to 0, left to 0, and then when we give it a height of 100% and a width of 100%, it will basically make it cover the entire page. Now we'll give it a Z index of only 2, so that it should be on top of the elements on the page and still under the sidebar, so that when we are clicking on the sidebar, the sidebar will still be on top of the overlay. Okay, so now we're going to have a background color of, let's say, black, but it is not going to be purely black. We are going to reduce the opacity. So we set the opacity at about 0.45. Okay, so nothing is going to change. We're going to have to do our magic with the JavaScript to add and remove these classes. Now we're going to add the open class on the sidebar at the same time as when we are adding the open class on the sidebar overlay. So we go to our dashboard file, we scroll to the bottom where we have our JavaScript. this is no longer the navbar responsiveness. We will rename it to sidebar responsiveness. And we are going to use the same menu icon to animate the sidebar, so we'll leave that selector there. We are also going to select the sidebar. It has a class of sidebar. We are also going to select the sidebar overlay. It has a class of sidebar overlay, and these are the only two elements we need. So I'm going to remove everything else here, and then we can now add our event listener on the menu icon. So we are basically going to say menu icon.add event listener will listen for a click event. When the user clicks on that menu icon, this function is going to execute. And what this function does is it is going to add the open class, or rather toggle the open class on the sidebar, and it is also going to open the sidebar overlay. Alright, so we can make this function reusable by giving it a name. So we are going to call it toggle sidebar. Okay, and then now we can just place it here. Alright, so when we toggle the menu, when we add an event listener on the menu icon to toggle the sidebar open, we'll also add an event listener on the sidebar overlay. And when you click on the sidebar overlay, it is also going to toggle the sidebar. So if the sidebar is open when the user has clicked on menu icon, the user should be able to close that sidebar by clicking on the sidebar overlay. So let us refresh and pray that this works. We click and it opens, and then we click on the overlay and it closes. So the responsiveness is working. So what we need to work on next is to add the logged in user's name on the sidebar when they are on mobile. So we are going to work on that in the next video.